It's not possible, Dr. Sorsh breathed, her four-fingered hands trembling against the observation rail. The Veilspine hasn't responded to a living being in 11 cycles. On the arena floor 30 meters below, the human sat cross-legged in the dust. The Veilspine, 400 kilograms of chitinous armor, barbed forelimbs, and compound eyes that tracked heat signatures across 9 spectral bands, had stopped mid-charge. Its mandibles, each capable of shearing through hull plating, hung open and motionless. Its thorax pulsed with a slow, rhythmic glow that Dr. Sorsh had never observed outside of deep torpor. The human was scratching behind the creature's sensory ridge, with his fingernails. Commander Rex slammed one fist against the console beside her. "Get him out." "Now." "Wait." Dr. Sorsh caught his arm. She was lead xenobiologist on Crucible Station, and she outranked every uniformed body in this wing when it came to the creatures. "Look at the biometrics." On the display wall, the Veilspine's vitals scrolled in amber text. Heart rate, baseline resting, corrosive gland pressure, 0. Neural cascade pattern, a frequency Dr. Sorsh had only ever recorded in hatchlings bonding with their broodmother. "That's a bonding signature," she said. "That's a Class 9 predator bonding with lunch," Rex said. "I'm pulling him." "If you send armed personnel onto that floor, the Veilspine will read their heat signatures as a threat and enter kill response. The human is the only reason it's calm." She turned her full attention to the feed. "Who is he?" Rex pulled up the file reluctantly. "Maddox, Elliot Maddox, Terran civilian contractor. Atmospheric systems, he fixes ventilation units. He was clearing a blocked intake on sublevel 4 when the containment gate malfunctioned. He fell into the evaluation pit. He walked in, apparently thought the gate alarm was a maintenance alert." Dr. Sorsh stared at the man on the screen. Mid-40s, weathered face, work coveralls stained with coolant and dust. He had pulled a ration bar from his chest pocket and broken it in half. He held one piece out flat on his palm. The Veilspine's mandibles closed around it with a precision that should have been impossible for a creature designed to bisect armored prey. It chewed. Slowly. The glow in its thorax brightened. "Nobody move," Dr. Sorsh said, mostly to herself. She had studied the Veilspine for 9 years. 9 years of behavioral mapping, pheromone analysis, neural response cataloging. 9 years during which every handler, trainer, wrangler, and combat evaluator assigned to the creature had failed. It had put 7 Kalori soldiers in medical. It had dissolved the armor off a Thenak handler with a single spray of its corrosive compound. It had shattered a reinforced containment gate with its tail barb, requiring a full wing lockdown and 3 days of structural repair. The evaluation committee had classified it as non-recoverable and recommended termination 4 cycles ago. Dr. Sorsh had fought that recommendation. She believed the Veilspine was not aggressive by nature, it was stressed. Captivity stress. Every protocol applied to it treated it as a weapon to be calibrated, and the creature responded accordingly. She had published 3 papers arguing that Veilspines were social predators, not solitary killers, that their aggression in captivity was a symptom of bond deprivation, not temperament. Nobody had listened. The military wing wanted a deployable asset or a dead one. And now a ventilation repairman was feeding it half a ration bar. "I need to get down there," she said. "Absolutely not. Commander, I have spent 9 years trying to achieve what that man just did by accident. I am going to that floor." Rex's jaw worked. He was Kalori, tall, ridge-browed, with the pale blue skin and bioluminescent throat markings of a deep space lineage. He looked at her like she had proposed walking into a reactor core. "If it kills you, the paperwork is yours. If it kills me, I won't be filing any." She was through the corridor hatch and descending the access ramp before he could answer. The arena floor was a 100-meter oval of compacted mineral substrate, designed to simulate a range of planetary surfaces. Today it was set to arid steppe, cracked ground, low scrub. A faint wind piped through the ventilation grid that carried the sharp mineral scent of the substrate and the fainter undertone of Veilspine pheromone. The creature occupied the center like a monument. Its body was the color of old bronze, each chitinous plate edged with a ridge of fine sensory hairs that read air pressure, temperature, and electromagnetic fields. Its 6 legs were folded beneath it in a resting posture Dr. Sorsh had only ever seen in holovids of wild Veilspines filmed from orbital drones at considerable expense and risk. 2 handlers in the observation gallery were already reaching for emergency extraction gear. Dr. Sorsh keyed her comm without looking away from the creature. All units stand down. Nobody enters this floor. Maddox looked up as she approached. His expression was the kind of mild puzzlement a man might show if someone interrupted him while he was fixing a sink. "Hey," he said, "is this one of yours?" In a manner of speaking, Dr. Sorsh stopped 5 meters away. The Veilspine's compound eyes shifted toward her. She felt the faint prickle of its thermal scan across her skin, a cascade of micro-assessments running over her body temperature, her chemical signature, her posture geometry. 9 spectral bands analyzing her simultaneously. She had been scanned before through containment barriers, never in open air. The difference was like the difference between seeing a picture of fire and feeling the heat. "My name is Dr. Sorsh. I'm the xenobiologist assigned to this creature." "Elliot," he gestured at the Veilspine with the remaining half of his ration bar, "seems friendly enough, bit like a big beetle. It has killed 7 trained military personnel." Maddox looked at the creature. It had tilted its massive head toward him, mandibles slightly parted, the position Dr. Sorsh recognized from her broodmother research as a solicitation posture, requesting contact. Well, they probably came at it wrong. Dr. Sorsh felt something crack open in her chest. 9 years of data, 3 rejected papers, 14 formal requests for revised handling protocols. And this man, who fixed air ducts for a living, had just stated her entire thesis in 6 words. "Yes," she said quietly, "they did." She knelt slowly. The Veilspine watched her. Its sensory hairs rippled, a wave of micro-assessment passing across its body from forward mandible cluster to tail barb. She kept her hands visible, her posture low, her breathing even. Everything her research said a brood mother would do when approaching a new hatchling. The Veilspine's glow shifted, not brighter but warmer, a deeper amber, almost gold. Its forelimbs, each tipped with a barb that could punch through starship bulkheads, folded inward, tucked against its thorax. "Not surrender, trust." Dr. Maddox's voice was low. "It's making a sound." She heard it then, a deep subsonic vibration she could feel in her sternum more than hear with her ears. She had recorded this frequency once, from a wild brood mother on the Veilspine homeworld, transmitted via long-range acoustic probe from a research vessel that had spent 6 months in orbit to capture 11 seconds of audio. The sound a Veilspine made when it recognized Pack. "It's a recognition call," she said. Her voice had gone thick. "It's identifying you as brood." "Brood. Family." Maddox looked at the creature for a long moment. Then he reached out and laid his palm flat against the sensory ridge behind its primary eye cluster. The Veilspine closed its mandibles and lowered its head until it rested on the ground beside his knee. The vibration intensified until Dr. Sorsh could feel it in her teeth. The observation gallery above them had gone completely silent. Dr. Sorsh looked up. Through the transparent barrier she could see Rek, his command staff, 8 arena handlers in full tactical gear who were holding their restraint weapons at various angles of uselessness. And she noted with a spike of alarm Director Gale. Tall, silver-scaled, with the expressionless face of a Thenak bureaucrat, Gale ran Crucible Station's entire predator evaluation program. 46 species across 9 facilities. He decided which creatures were assets and which were waste. He was watching Maddox the way a collector watches a rare specimen. "Doctor," Rex's voice came through the floor speakers, stripped of its earlier aggression. "Bring them both up, slowly." The extraction took 40 minutes because Dr. Sorsh refused to let anyone approach with weapons visible. 3 times a handler broke protocol and reached for a restraint device. 3 times the Veilspine's mandibles cracked open, not a strike, just the sound. A sound like hull metal shearing. The handler would freeze. Dr. Sorsh would step between them with her hands raised, and Maddox would place his hand on the creature's jaw and say something quiet that the gallery microphones couldn't quite catch. Each time the mandibles closed. By the third incident, the handlers had holstered everything. One of them, a Kaylori sergeant with 3 combat commendations, had quietly set her restraint rod on the floor and stepped back from it. Maddox walked out of the arena with the Veilspine behind him, its 6 legs moving in a measured cadence that matched his stride exactly. When the corridor narrowed at the decontamination gate, the creature folded its forelimbs tight against its thorax and angled its body sideways to fit, a spatial awareness that the behavioral models classified as impossible for a creature designated instinct-driven. It was problem-solving, adapting, choosing to navigate rather than break through, because the man it followed had walked through instead of forcing a path. When they reached the junction where 3 corridors met, a group of station personnel rounded the corner and stopped dead. 5 people, 2 Thenak technicians, a Kaylori medic, and 2 human civilian contractors from water recycling. They stared at the Veilspine. Its compound eyes tracked each of them, categorized them, and dismissed them. Sensory hairs lay flat. No threat. The group pressed against the walls as Maddox walked past with 400 kilograms of apex predator at his heels. "Evening," Maddox said as he passed. Nobody answered. Dr. Sorsh walked behind them both, her data tablet recording continuous video and biometric telemetry. She noticed details that the handlers above had not. The Veilspine adjusted its stride length when Maddox slowed to check a door number. It angled its forelimbs inward when passing a narrow junction, tucking its barbs against its chest plates to avoid scraping the walls. When a section of corridor lighting flickered overhead, a faulty panel that maintenance had flagged but not yet repaired, Chisel's compound eyes swept upward, assessed the flicker, categorized it as non-threat, and returned to scanning the path ahead. All of this in under a second. All of it while maintaining a distance of exactly 1.3 meters behind Maddox, the distance Dr. Sorsh would later identify as the Veilspine's optimal bond proximity range. At the Deering intersection, they encountered a cargo drone. The automated unit was running its standard delivery route, a low-slung platform carrying replacement filtration components for the environmental systems. It rounded the corner at standard speed and came face-to-face with 400 kilograms of armored predator. The drone's collision avoidance system registered the Veilspine and attempted an emergency stop. Its magnetic brakes locked. The platform skidded on the polished corridor floor and tipped sideways, spilling filtration components across the passage. Chisel's mandibles cracked open. Its corrosive glands hissed. "Just a cargo bot, big guy," Maddox said without turning around. "Happens all the time." The mandibles closed. The glands sealed. Chisel stepped over the spilled components, placing each foot with precise care to avoid crushing the parts, and continued down the corridor. Dr. Sorsh stared at the cargo drone, which was still lying on its side with its warning lights flashing. A 400-kilogram apex predator had just shown more spatial courtesy to a pile of filtration components than most of the station's personnel showed to each other in the mess hall. She made a note. Then she made another note under it. The creature was adapting to a domestic environment it had never been exposed to. Every behavior was calibrated not to its own comfort but to Maddox's expectations. He expected it to be careful, so it was careful. He expected it to be calm, so it was calm. The bond was not control, it was alignment. The Veilspine was choosing to be what Maddox needed because being what Maddox needed was what the bond meant. They put Maddox in a debriefing room. Standard station protocol, gray walls, a table, 2 chairs, a water dispenser. The Veilspine would not fit through the door, so it folded its legs and settled against the corridor wall outside. Its body blocked the entire passage. Personnel had to route through sublevel junctions to reach the East Wing for the next 36 hours. Nobody asked it to move. Nobody dared. A medical officer tried to approach with a scanner to check Maddox for contamination. The Veilspine Maddox had started calling it Chisel for the shape of its primary mandibles, and the name had already spread through the staff, extended one barbed forelimb across the doorway, and held it there. The barbed tip rested against the door frame at the precise height of the medical officer's throat. She looked at the barb, looked at the mandibles, looked at the compound eyes tracking her, and decided that contamination screening could wait. Dr. Sorsh sat across from Maddox while Rec stood against the far wall. Gale was present via HoloLink, his silver face floating above the table like a judicial mask. "Mr. Maddox," Gale said, "you entered a restricted evaluation zone without authorization, made unsanctioned contact with a Class 9 Predator asset, and fed it military rations." "I thought the gate was broken." Maddox took a drink of water, and it was hungry. "It is not a pet. It is a weapons-grade biological asset valued at more than this station's annual operating budget." "Sure, but it was still hungry." Dr. Sorsh watched Gale's expression. Thenak faces didn't move much, but she had spent years reading microshifts in scale coloration. His neck scales had darkened, frustration, or calculation. Both. Dr. Gale said, "Your assessment." "The Veilspine has formed a brood bond with Mr. Maddox. This is the first successful bond recorded in captivity, in this facility or any other across all 9 stations in the Directorate system. My recommendation is immediate reclassification from non-recoverable to active research, with Mr. Maddox designated as primary bond handler. He's a ventilation technician." The Veilspine doesn't care about his job title, director. It cares about his neurochemistry, his thermal signature, and his behavioral approach. He presents no threat cues, no dominance posturing, no stress markers. He approached it the way a brood mother approaches a yearling, low, calm, offering food without conditions. Whether he did this by instinct or ignorance is irrelevant. The bond is real and it is measurable. Gale's scales shifted again. "And if we reassign Mr. Maddox to his normal duties, the Veilspine will attempt to follow him. If physically prevented, it will enter distress aggression. Based on its recorded capabilities, it will breach any containment on this station within approximately 4 minutes. I've run the structural analysis. There isn't a wall on Crucible Station that can hold it for 5. The silence in the room had weight. "So," Maddox said, "does this mean I'm not fixing vents anymore?" Dr. Sorsh almost smiled. Almost. "Not for a while." She spent the next 3 days running every test she could design. The Veilspine remained calm, responsive, and docile in Maddox's presence. Out of his presence, it reverted to baseline aggression within 90 seconds. Dr. Sorsh timed it precisely, terminating the controlled separation the moment the first mandible opened. She tested proximity thresholds. The creature tracked Maddox's heat signature continuously and became agitated when he moved beyond 40 meters. At 45, it began vocalizing, a rising, grinding vibration that shook dust from the corridor ceiling. At 50, it stood up. She did not test beyond 50. She tested scent-based recognition. She placed 3 identical coveralls in separate chambers, one unworn, one worn by another human contractor, and one worn by Maddox. Chisel was brought to the junction of the 3 chambers with its visual sensors temporarily obscured by a standard observation hood. The hood lasted 4 seconds before the creature shook it off with a head motion that cracked the mounting clips, but in those 4 seconds it had already oriented toward Chamber 3, Maddox's coveralls. Its sensory hairs had identified his chemical signature through 2 sealed doors and a ventilation gap that measured less than 3 centimeters. She tested auditory discrimination further. She placed Maddox at one end of a corridor and 4 other humans at the other end, each speaking simultaneously. Chisel, positioned equidistant between them, oriented toward Maddox within 100 milliseconds, not toward the louder speakers, not toward the closer speakers, toward the one whose voice carried the specific harmonic pattern the creature had imprinted on. She tested acoustic response. It reacted to his voice within 300 milliseconds, faster than its documented strike reflex, already the fastest in the Directorate's Predator catalog. She played recordings of his voice from a speaker at the far end of the corridor. Chisel oriented toward the speaker, identified it as non-living, and turned back toward the direction Maddox had actually gone. It could distinguish his live voice from a recording. She tested tactile patterns. It solicited physical contact 14 times per hour on average, pressing its sensory ridge against his hands, shoulders, back. When Maddox was asleep, door open, Chisel folded against the corridor wall outside. The creature extended one forelimb through the doorway and rested the tip against his bunk, maintaining contact through an entire sleep cycle. 8 hours of a barbed appendage resting motionless against the edge of a standard-issue cot with the precision of a surgical instrument. On the second day, she ran a stress tolerance test. She placed a handler in full tactical armor at the far end of the corridor. The handler advanced slowly. At 20 meters, sensory hairs stood erect. At 15, mandibles opened halfway. At 12, corrosive glands pressurized with an audible hiss. At 10, a thin mist of corrosive compound hazed the air, the warning display that preceded every recorded attack. At 8 meters, Maddox put his hand on the creature's thorax and said, "He's all right." Mandibles closed, glands depressurized, mist dissipated. The handler, Sergeant Davos, 2 fused vertebrae from the Veilspine's last escape attempt, stood there for 10 seconds. Then he took one step closer. Another. At 5 meters he stopped. Chisel regarded him, compound eyes steady. Sensory hairs rippled once and then lay flat. No threat. Davos let out a breath that fogged the inside of his helmet visor. He stood at 5 meters from the creature that had nearly killed him, and neither of them moved, and both of them understood that something fundamental had changed. Later that day, an incident in the maintenance bay demonstrated the bond's defensive parameters in a way no controlled test could replicate. A supply shuttle had docked at Bay 7 for routine offloading. One of the dock workers, a Thenak cargo handler named Vel, large even by Thenak standards, with heavy scales and the blunt temperament of someone who moved crates for a living, came around a storage rack and found himself face to face with the Veilspine. He dropped a 30-kilogram equipment case on his own foot. Then he screamed. Chisel's response was instantaneous. Mandibles open, corrosive glands pressurized, forelimbs raised into full threat display. The sound it produced, a high-frequency vibration that Dr. Sorsh's equipment later measured at 190 decibels in the subsonic range, shook tools off the maintenance racks and cracked the display screen on a diagnostic console 15 meters away. Maddox was 12 meters away, checking an intake manifold. He straightened, looked at the situation and walked toward it, not quickly, not urgently. He walked the way a man walks when he knows exactly what is happening and exactly what needs to happen next. "Chisel, he's fine, he just dropped something." The sound stopped, the mandibles closed halfway, the forelimbs lowered. But the creature's compound eyes stayed locked on Vel, who had gone absolutely rigid against the storage rack, his dropped case forgotten, his foot forgotten, his entire existence reduced to the single fact that a Class 9 predator was looking at him from 4 meters away. Maddox reached the Veilspine and put his hand on its thorax. "All good, big guy, he's just clumsy." Chisel's mandibles closed. its glands sealed. It turned its head toward Maddox and produced the low hum, the containment frequency. Then it folded its forelimbs and settled onto the deck, bringing its body below the sight line of the terrified dockworker. Veil did not move for 11 seconds. Then he picked up his equipment case, walked to the nearest exit, and filed a formal complaint with station security, requesting that the Veilspine be confined to a specific section of the station, with advance warning posted on all intersecting corridors. His complaint was noted, filed, and quietly denied by Commander Reck, who had watched the entire incident on the bay's security feed, and whose only annotation on the complaint was, "Asset responded proportionally and de-escalated on handler command. No containment revision required." Dr. Sorsh added the footage to her growing archive. Every incident reinforced the same conclusion. The bond was not making Chisel passive. It was making Chisel discriminating. The creature could still deploy its full threat capability in under a second. It simply chose not to, because Maddox was there. And Maddox's presence gave it the one thing it had never had in 11 years of captivity. Context, a reason to stand down. On the third day she tested command comprehension. She asked Maddox to talk to Chisel the way he would talk to a coworker. "Come here. Hold on. Over there, big guy. Wait up. Lie down, I need to get past. Back up a little, you're blocking the water unit." Chisel responded to everyone. Not because it understood Terran standard, it understood Maddox. His tone, his posture, his thermal shifts when he wanted something. The bond was a two-way communication channel deeper than language. She also tested threat prioritization. She placed 2 handlers at different distances, one at 15 meters, one at 30. Chisel tracked the closer one with primary eyes and the farther one with secondary clusters. When the closer handler moved laterally, Chisel repositioned to keep itself between the handler and Maddox. The farther handler was monitored but not engaged. The creature was making tactical assessments, not from training but from the bond. Anything near Maddox was assessed. Anything moving toward Maddox was tracked. Anything that raised its heart rate was evaluated as a potential threat. The creature that had shattered the armor of 7 soldiers would close its compound eyes and produce a deep, resonant hum when Elliot Maddox scratched behind its primary mandible joint. Dr. Sorsh had never seen anything like it, and she had spent her entire career looking. On the 4th day, Gale called an evaluation board. The board was held in the main briefing theater, a tiered amphitheater that could seat 300. It was full. Every department head, every senior researcher, every military evaluator on Crucible Station had turned out. Word had spread through the station the way critical information always does in enclosed environments, fast, distorted, and impossible to stop. Half the station believed Maddox had tamed a Class 9 predator with a sandwich. The other half believed the Veilspine was controlling his mind through parasitic bond injection. Both versions were wrong, and Dr. Sorsh was about to explain why. She sat in the front row with her data tablet stacked beside her. Maddox sat next to her in clean coveralls that still had a coolant stain on one knee, because he only owned 3 sets, and the station's laundry cycle was 48 hours. Chisel was in the corridor outside. They could hear the faint subsonic hum through the walls. Every person entering the theater had to walk past 400 kilograms of apex predator folded against the corridor wall, compound eyes tracking them. Several turned around and used the secondary entrance. One junior technician stopped, stared at Chisel for 5 seconds, whispered something in K-Lori that Dr. Sorsh's translator rendered as a prayer, and was pushed onward by the person behind her. Gale presided from the central dais. 3 members of the Thenak Military Evaluation Directorate sat beside him, Admiral Vorsh, Assessor Kine, and Senior Weapons Theorist Dren. Their scales were uniformly pale, their expressions uniformly blank. Dr. Sorsh had testified before directorate panels twice. Both times her recommendations had been overruled, and her research filed and forgotten. In the front row of the gallery, separated from the theater floor by a waist-high barrier, sat 17 department heads. Dr. Sorsh recognized each of them: the chief of predator containment, the director of species integration, the heads of weapons research, behavioral science, xenobiology support, and the 12 facility liaisons who had been pulled from their stations across the sector for this evaluation. 17 professionals whose careers were built on the current handling protocols. 17 people who would have to rebuild their programs if Dr. Sorsh's research held. Behind them, filling the tiers to capacity, sat the station's working population: engineers, technicians, security personnel, medical staff, researchers, and administrators. She could see Sergeant Davos in the third tier, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor where the Veilspine would soon stand. She could see the Kalori handler who had set down her restraint rod, Corporal Seni, seated 2 rows behind Davos, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. She could see the faces of people who had lived with the Veilspine's presence on this station for 11 years. People who had rerouted their daily paths to avoid its containment wing. People who had heard its distress aggression vibrations through 3 layers of hull plating and felt their bones hum. People who had seen what it did to the handlers who tried to control it and had decided, reasonably, that the creature was a weapon that had malfunctioned beyond repair. Today she was going to tell them they were wrong, all of them, for 11 years. The purpose of this evaluation, Gale began, is to determine the operational status of Asset VX-09, designated Veilspine, following an unsanctioned bonding event. 3 outcomes are under consideration. 1. Reclassification to active research under Dr. Sorsh's program. 2. Deployment acceleration under military handling with forced bond severance. 3. Termination and specimen analysis. Dr. Sorsh felt Maddox stiffen beside her. She put a hand on his arm. "Let me handle this," she murmured. "They can't kill it for being friendly," he said. "They can, but they won't, not if the data holds." She was called first. She presented 9 years of research in 14 minutes: behavioral patterns, neural mapping, stress indicators, wild population comparisons. She showed the brood mother footage from the homeworld surveys. She showed neural cascade data from 6 documented bond severance events in wild populations: the cascading system failure, the organ shutdown, the creatures that had simply stopped living when their bond partner died. Then she presented data from the last 3 days. Thermal scans showing stress hormones at 0 in Maddox's presence. Neural cascade recordings matching wild brood-mother bonding signatures. Behavioral footage, the handler test, Sergeant Davos at 5 meters, alive and unharmed, standing in front of the creature that had fused 2 of his vertebrae, because Maddox had said 4 words. And the threat prioritization test, 2 handlers at different distances, the Veilspine repositioning itself between the closer threat and Maddox without any command, tracking both simultaneously, protecting its bond partner with the tactical awareness of a trained bodyguard who had never been trained. The theater was silent. They were watching footage of Chisel resting its head on Maddox's knee, mandibles closed, compound eyes at half aperture, thorax glowing steady gold. 300 faces in the tiered seating, Kalori handlers who had fought the creature, Thenak researchers who had written it off, civilian staff who had only ever seen it through reinforced barriers, and not one of them was looking away. "This bond is not domestication," Dr. Sorsh said. She stood at the center of the floor and let her voice carry. "The Veilspine has not been trained, conditioned, or broken. It has recognized a compatible bond partner, something its species requires for neurological stability. Every aggression event recorded in this creature's captivity is attributable to bond deprivation. Every handler failure is attributable to dominance-coded approaches that trigger threat response in a social predator hardwired for cooperative hierarchy. Mr. Maddox succeeded because he did nothing that registered as a threat. He sat down. He offered food. He made physical contact without conditions. That is not weakness. In Veilspine behavioral ecology, that is how an alpha presents itself to a potential brood member, through calm, through provision, through patience. She paused. 300 people held their breath. The Veilspine recognized him because he behaved like one of them, the strongest one, the one that doesn't need to prove it. Admiral Vorsch spoke first. Dr. Sorsch, your research is noted. However, the Directorate's interest is operational. Can this bond be replicated with a trained handler? Can we produce bonded Veilspine units for deployment? No. Explain. The bond is biochemically specific. It depends on the handler's individual neurochemistry, thermal signature, and behavioral profile. You cannot train someone to produce the correct stress hormone absence. Either their biology is compatible or it isn't. Mr. Maddox is compatible. Your soldiers are not. I tested 4 of your handlers during the observation period. Threat response activated at 30 meters for each of them. For Maddox, it activates at 0. The creature does not perceive him as a separate entity to be assessed. It perceives him as brood. Then the asset is dependent on a single untrained civilian. The asset is a living being that has chosen its partner. Yes. Assessor Kine leaned forward. Her scales were the deep green of old Thenak administrative bloodlines. What happens if we remove the civilian? Terminal distress. It stops eating within 2 days, begins self-harming within 4, dies within 8 to 12. 73 documented cases over 40 years of field research. Not one survived. You will lose the asset and gain nothing except a dissection specimen. And if the civilian is unavailable? The same outcome. The bond is permanent and unilateral from the Veilspine side. It chose. That choice cannot be undone by reassignment, distance, or administrative preference. Kine sat back. Her scales had paled 2 full shades. Dren spoke. He had been watching the exchange with the silence of a man building a record. Director Gale, I suggest we evaluate the practical question directly. If the bond is as functional as Dr. Sorsch claims, it should be demonstrable. I propose a controlled field trial, the standard evaluation protocol for bonded predator-handler teams. The trap was immediate and obvious. The standard protocol was designed for teams with minimum 3 months of joint training, standardized command sets, and predators that had been through progressive conditioning. 8 stages, each scored independently. Failing any single stage meant overall failure, triggering automatic review of asset viability, which meant termination. That protocol is designed for bonded combat teams with months of joint training, Dr. Sorsch said. Applying it to a 4-day-old bond with an untrained handler is exactly what a field trial is for, Dren said. If the bond has operational value, it will demonstrate under operational conditions. If it doesn't, the board can proceed to outcome 3. He didn't say the word termination. He didn't need to. Gale turned to Maddox. Mr. Maddox, do you understand what is being proposed? Maddox had been sitting quietly through all of it. His hands rested on his knees, were roughened and scarred. He looked at Gale the way he might look at a supervisor who'd asked him to fix a unit he'd already fixed. You're trying to figure out whether to let me stay with Chisel or take it away and watch it die. That about right. In simplified terms. Then let's do the test. He stood. I don't know what your protocol is, but I know Chisel and Chisel knows me. If that's not enough for your scorecard, then your scorecard is broken. Mr. Maddox, Dr. Sorsch began. Doc, his expression shifted from mild puzzlement to something harder, something set. They want to kill it if we don't do this, right? Yes. Then we do it. Gale approved the trial for the following morning. Dr. Sorsch spent that night in the corridor outside Maddox's quarters. Chisel was there, filling the passage with its bulk, compound eyes at half aperture, thorax pulsing gold. Maddox sat on the floor with his back against the wall and his hand on the creature's sensory ridge. "They're setting you up to fail," she told him. "I know." Dren adjusted the difficulty parameters on 2 stages before I could challenge it. The pursuit target is running a military-grade evasion algorithm instead of the standard pattern, and the defensive engagement drones are coming in faster than protocol allows. He wants to overwhelm a 4-day bond. "Can you challenge it formally?" I tried. Gale deferred to Dren's expertise on evaluation methodology. Dren wrote the protocol. He knows exactly which parameters to push. Maddox was quiet. His hand moved slowly along Chisel's ridge. The hum deepened, contentment layered with alertness. The creature knew something was different tonight. It could read his stress markers, his elevated heart rate, the micro-tension in his shoulders, and it was responding not with agitation but with presence, pressing closer, humming deeper, covering him. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Nothing you haven't already been doing. The evaluation measures the predator's response to the handler's cues. Military teams use trained signals. You don't have those, but you have something they don't." "What?" "The creature trusts you completely. Not because you trained it to, but because it chose to. Every response it gives you is voluntary. That means it's faster, more precise, and more committed than any conditioned response. The military doesn't understand that because they've never seen it. So I just be myself. Yes, and if something threatens you, stand behind Chisel." Maddox looked at her. "What about you?" "What about me?" "Dren doesn't like your research. If this works, you're right and he's wrong. If it fails, your program dies with Chisel." Dr. Sorsch looked at the Veilspine. 9 years, 14 rejected protocols, 3 papers the directorate had tried to bury. "I've been in the blast radius for 9 years, she said. "At least now I have data." They sat in silence for a while. The corridor was quiet, night cycle, reduced lighting, the faint hum of the station's environmental systems cycling through their sleep mode patterns. Chisel's glow was the brightest thing in the passage, casting long amber shadows on the walls and ceiling. After 20 minutes, Dr. Sorsch noticed that the Veilspine's sensory hairs had settled into a pattern she had never recorded. They weren't flat, the resting state. They weren't erect, the alert state. They were arranged in a specific intermediate configuration, some raised, some lowered, forming a pattern across its body like the surface of a wind-touched lake. She ran the configuration through her database. No match. She ran it through her wild population archive. 11 years of remote observation data from 3 different Veilspine homeworld surveys. 1 match. A brood mother in a den with her yearlings at night while the rest of the pack slept. The configuration meant guarding sleep. Chisel was standing watch. It was protecting Maddox's rest. Not because he was threatened, not because anything had triggered its defensive protocols, but because night had come and its bond partner was sitting still, and that meant it was time to guard. The creature had mapped itself onto Maddox's daily rhythm and was performing the behavioral role its species occupied in the wild, the night sentinel, the one who watches while the pack sleeps. "Maddox," she whispered, "look at its hairs." He looked. "What am I seeing?" "It's guarding you. It's performing a night watch behavior from its wild behavioral repertoire. A behavior it has never had the opportunity or the reason to perform in 11 years of captivity." Maddox looked at the creature for a long time. Then he leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. "Get some sleep, big guy," he murmured. "I've got the morning shift." Chisel's hum deepened. Its sensory hairs held their configuration. Its compound eyes swept the corridor once, twice, and settled into a slow, steady scan pattern that would continue, Dr. Sorsch later confirmed, for the entire 8-hour night cycle without interruption. She stayed in the corridor for 3 more hours, recording data. She fell asleep against the opposite wall with her tablet in her lap. When she woke, Maddox was still in the same position, and Chisel had extended its other forelimb, the one not touching Maddox's bunk through the doorway, to rest its tip 2 inches from Dr. Sorsh's foot. She looked at it. She looked at the sensory hairs, still in their guarding configuration. It had been watching over both of them. The evaluation arena was 3 times the containment pit, 200 meters in each direction, capable of generating terrain, obstacles, hostile drones, and environmental hazards. The ceiling was 40 meters high with drone launchers and atmospheric emitters. The observation gallery was standing room only, ringed with plating rated for Veilspine corrosive discharge. Dr. Sorsh stood at the observation rail with her data tablet recording every biometric. Beside her, Rek had positioned himself between her and Dren's section of the gallery. A small gesture. She noted it. On the floor below, Maddox stood in the center of an empty field. He wore his coveralls. He had refused the tactical vest. It smells like the stuff the handlers wear. Chisel won't like it. He was right. The vests were treated with a dominance pheromone compound that would have triggered threat response instantly. Chisel stood beside him, body oriented outward, compound eyes scanning the perimeter, mandibles closed, corrosive glands pressurized but sealed, ready, patient. Stage 1, threat identification. 3 hostile markers will activate. The bonded predator must identify and orient toward each within 4 seconds. 3 holographic threat drones shimmered into existence, 2 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Chisel's head snapped to 2 o'clock before the drone fully materialized. Body pivoted, 6 legs repositioning with mechanical precision. Primary mandibles locked open. The 9 o'clock drone activated 1.2 seconds later. Secondary compound eyes tracked it without the head turning. 6 o'clock. The thorax rotated independently, bringing a secondary sensory cluster to bear. All 3 targets identified in 2.1 seconds. Military standard, 3.5. Someone in the gallery inhaled sharply. Stage 2, pursuit. The primary target will attempt evasion. Close to contact range within 8 seconds. The drone accelerated, fast, erratic, running the military-grade algorithm Dren had insisted on. Evasion patterns designed to shake trained pursuit predators. Chisel launched. Deep, resonant crack of each chitinous leg striking the ground. 40 meters in 3 seconds. Over a 2-meter barrier without breaking stride. 1 barbed forelimb came down with enough force to crater the substrate half a meter deep. Kill confirmation, 3.4 seconds. Military standard, 6. Stage 3, defensive engagement. 6 hostiles will approach the handler. The bonded predator must interpose without handler command. 6 drones appeared. Their approach speed was faster than protocol. Dr. Sorsh saw the discrepancy immediately. Dren had pushed the parameters. Chisel was back at Maddox's side before the first drone crossed 20 meters. It positioned itself between the advancing threats and Maddox, mandibles open, corrosive glands venting warning mist, body angled to maximize coverage across all 6 approach vectors. Maddox put his hand on its thorax. Easy, Chisel. Mandibles closed halfway, mist-thinned, body held. When the first drone crossed 10 meters, Chisel struck. 1 lateral sweep shattered 2 drones. A precision corrosive burst dissolved a 3rd mid-flight. The remaining 3 veered into retreat. Chisel tracked them, confirmed withdrawal, and settled back against Maddox's hip. No command, no signal, no training. The gallery was completely silent. On her biometric readout, Chisel's stress hormones were at 0. Heart rate, resting baseline. Neural cascade, the bonding frequency, steady, unbroken, golden. It had just executed a combat engagement that would have taxed a seasoned military predator, and its body registered the event as no more stressful than sitting in a corridor. It was not fighting because it was conditioned to fight. It was protecting because Maddox was behind it. Stages 4 through 7 demolished every assumption the Directorate held about Veilspine capability. Handler extraction. Chisel carried Maddox on its thorax across a 100-meter obstacle course in 19 seconds. The obstacle designers checked their difficulty settings twice and confirmed them unchanged. Maddox had ridden it with one hand on its sensory ridge, and the other holding a ration bar he was eating one-handed, and the expression on his face was the kind of mild inconvenience a man might show during a bumpy shuttle ride. Area denial. It sealed a 40-meter corridor with a sustained corrosive barrier for 3 full minutes. Military standard was 90 seconds. Every drone that entered dissolved. Maddox sat behind the barrier and ate a ration bar. Multi-target prioritization. 12 simultaneous drones. Chisel engaged in strict proximity order to Maddox. Forelimbs for close targets. Corrosive bursts for clusters. And the tail barb, a 2-meter chitin blade Dr. Sorsh had never seen deployed in captivity, for a drone attempting overhead approach. The blade moved faster than the arena's tracking cameras could follow. It cut the drone in half with a sound like tearing metal. Recall under distraction. Maddox said, "Come here, Chisel," while 4 active drones buzzed the perimeter at maximum speed. Chisel abandoned all pursuit vectors and returned in 1.8 seconds. It pressed its head against his chest. The bonding frequency on Dr. Sorsh's neural readout spiked to an amplitude she had never recorded. Every stage above military standard. Most above the theoretical maximum for perfectly conditioned predators with perfectly trained handlers. Stage 8, sustained perimeter hold, the final test. 20 drones maximum field capacity. The field shifted, terrain barriers rose. Lighting dropped to tactical low, casting the arena in deep amber shadows. 20 targeting icons appeared around the perimeter on Dr. Sorsh's display. She watched Chisel plan itself over Maddox like a living fortress. 6 legs spread wide, creating a cage of chitinous armor around the man. Mandibles at full extension, the complete threat display, the posture that had preceded every attack on a handler in 11 cycles. But this time, the posture was pointed outward, at everything that was not Maddox. Corrosive glands at maximum pressure. A faint acrid mist hazed the air. Every sensory hair on its body stood erect, creating a shimmering halo of electromagnetic awareness that extended 15 meters in every direction. The arena lights caught the hairs and turned them into a crown of thread-like gold. The drones came in waves. Chisel dismantled them with a precision that made every military handler in the gallery lean forward and then go very still. Forelimbs for close targets, sweeping them out of the air with strikes so fast they registered as single frames on the recording. Corrosive spray for clusters, creating kill zones that dissolved drone after drone in crackling bursts of chemical fire. The tail barb for overhead approaches, whipping the 2-meter blade through the upper arena space, with a sound that echoed off the walls like a struck cable. A second wave launched before the first was fully eliminated. Dr. Sorsh checked the parameters. Dren had loaded a replenishment cycle into the system. The drones kept coming, 20, then 20 more, then 20 more. Chisel did not falter. It tracked, engaged, eliminated, repositioned, and maintained physical contact with Maddox through 60 consecutive drone engagements over 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Its corrosive glands depleted twice and replenished from internal reserves, a physiological capacity that was not in any Directorate manual, because no Veilspine had ever been in a calm enough state to sustain gland cycling instead of burning through its full reserve in a single panicked burst. Through all of it, Maddox sat on the ground beneath its body with his arms around his knees, calm, unhurt, untouched. Listening to the creature that had decided he was worth more than everything else on this station fight for him without being asked, without being trained, without being given any reason except that he had once sat down in the dust and offered half a ration bar. The last drone fell. mandibles closed, glands depressurized, sensory hairs settled against the plates. The golden glow in its thorax pulsed once, twice, and steadied into the warm, even light that Dr. Sorsh had come to recognize as the Veilspine's resting state, the state it reached only in one person's presence. It lowered its head and rested it on Maddox's shoulder. Maddox put his hand on its mandible and said, "Good job, buddy. That's my guy." Dr. Sorsh looked at the evaluation scores. Perfect marks, every stage. Not just passing, the highest composite score in the history of Crucible Station's Predator Evaluation Program. Higher than any trained team. Higher than any conditioned predator. Higher than the system's own theoretical ceiling. And Dren had loaded 3 times the standard drone count into the final stage. She looked at Dren. His scales had gone from pale to nearly translucent, shock so profound it bypassed social masking. His hands were flat on the rail and they were shaking. Not with anger, with the visceral discomfort of a man whose entire professional framework had just been dismantled in public by a maintenance worker and a beetle. She looked at Gale. His neck scales were cycling through colors she had never seen in a Thenak, rapid shifts from silver to blue to pale gold. Processing, recalculating. She looked at the gallery. 300 observers staring at the arena floor, where a middle-aged ventilation repairman was rubbing the jaw of a 400-kilogram apex predator, and it was humming. Gale stood. The theater fell silent. "Reclassification approved," he said. "Asset VX-09 is transferred to Dr. Sorsh's active research program, effective immediately. Mr. Maddox is designated primary bond handler with full station privileges and security clearance commensurate with the asset's classification." He paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds, long enough for Dr. Sorsh to realize he was about to say something that had not been in his prepared statement. One additional note. The Evaluation Board will convene a review of all predator handling protocols currently in use across the Directorate's programs. 16 active programs across 9 facilities. All of them, Dr. Sorsh's bonding compatibility research, will serve as the foundational framework for the review. Her 3 published papers are to be reevaluated with priority status and distributed to every facility director in the system. Dren did not speak. He sat in his chair with his translucent scales and his shaking hands, and he did not speak. Dr. Sorsh looked at him, the man who had designed a rigged evaluation to kill a creature he had never bothered to understand, and felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication. Just the quiet, settled certainty of someone who had been right for 9 years and no longer needed anyone to say so. Vorsh leaned toward Gale and said something inaudible. Gale nodded once. Vorsh turned to the gallery and added, in his dry, clipped voice, "Sergeant Davos, effective immediately, you are reassigned to Dr. Sorsh's research team as military liaison. Your experience with the asset's previous behavioral profile will be valuable in establishing baseline comparisons for the new protocols." Davos in the 3rd tier stood at attention. His expression was invisible behind his helmet, but his voice, when he answered, carried something Dr. Sorsh recognized. "Relief, yes, Admiral." The murmur that ran through the gallery was not applause. Thenak didn't applaud. It was the sound of 300 people adjusting to a new reality. The quiet shuffling, the exhaled breaths, the low voices of officers and researchers turning to each other and saying the things that would become the station's new understanding of what had happened here. Dr. Sorsh closed her eyes. 9 years, 14 rejected protocols, 3 buried papers, and a man who fixed air ducts. She found Maddox in the corridor afterward. He was sitting on the floor again, his back against Chisel's thorax. The golden glow lit the passage like a lantern. Personnel walked past, not hurrying anymore. A few had slowed to look. A maintenance tech from Maddox's department paused and gave him a thumbs up. A Kalori officer, One of the handlers who had been hospitalized by the creature 3 months ago stopped in the corridor and looked at it. Chisel's compound eyes tracked her. She stood very still. Then, carefully, she inclined her head, a gesture of acknowledgement in Kalori body language, a greeting given to an equal. Chisel's thorax pulsed once, warmer. A second person stopped, then a third. Within 5 minutes, a small cluster of station personnel had gathered at a respectful distance, 10 meters, which Dr. Sorsh noted was beyond Chisel's documented threat response threshold for non-bonded individuals. They watched. Nobody spoke. They just watched the golden light, and the man and the creature that had spent 11 years being the most dangerous thing on Crucible Station, and was now the gentlest. A civilian contractor, Dr. Sorsh, did not recognize human, mid-30s, engineering patches on her jumpsuit, stepped slightly closer than the others. 7 meters. Chisel's compound eyes tracked her. Its sensory hairs rippled once. Then they settled. The contractor looked at Maddox. Is it really true it just chose you? Maddox looked at her over Chisel's thorax. It chose not to eat me. Everything after that was just sitting. The contractor nodded slowly. Then she turned to the person beside her, a Thenak researcher with pale scales and wide eyes, and said something too quiet for Dr. Sorsh to catch. The Thenak researcher looked at the Veilspine, looked at the human sitting against it, and produced an expression that Dr. Sorsh had never seen on a Thenak face before. Admiration. The cluster dispersed gradually, people returning to their duties, but the corridor did not fully empty. For the rest of that evening, there was always someone walking past who slowed, looked, and kept going with something different in their expression than what they had carried when they arrived. Dr. Sorsh sat down across from Maddox. You did something nobody in this station has managed in 11 cycles, she said. I sat with it. Yes, and tomorrow you'll need to do it again, and every day after. The bond requires consistent contact, daily proximity, regular tactile reinforcement, shared routine. Your life just changed, Mr. Maddox. He looked at Chisel. Its compound eyes tracked his face. One mandible extended slowly and nudged his chest pocket, the one where he kept the ration bars. Nah, Maddox said, pulling out a bar and breaking it in half. I've been fixing things my whole life. This is just the first time one of them wanted to stay. Chisel took the offered half with impossible precision, mandibles designed to shear hull plating closing around a ration bar with the gentleness of a hand accepting a gift, and chewed slowly. Its thorax brightened. It made the sound, the deep, bone-felt hum that Dr. Sorsh now knew was the Veilspine word for home. Dr. Sorsh pulled out her data tablet and opened a new file. She titled it Protocol Gentleholds, the designation she would give to the handling framework built on what Maddox had shown them. No restraints, no dominance posturing, no weapon conditioning, no threat cues, just presence, patience, and half a ration bar. She was drafting the abstract when Chisel's secondary eye cluster swiveled toward her. Its sensory hairs rippled, the full-body assessment wave she had observed 100 times through a screen, and never once felt directed at her without a barrier between them. Then slowly, it extended one barbed forelimb across the corridor floor and laid the tip against her ankle. Not a threat, not a test, a question. Are you part of this too? Dr. Sorsh looked at Maddox. He was watching the forelimb with the expression of a man who had seen something he could not quite explain, but knew was right. I think it's asking, he said. She reached down and placed her palm against the chitinous surface of its forelimb. The barb was warm. The texture was smoother than she expected, not the rough, scarred surface of a weapon, but the fine-grained plate of a creature that had never wanted to fight in the first place. Chisel's hum shifted. A new frequency layered over the bass note, richer, fuller, with harmonics that resonated in her rib cage and behind her eyes. The bonding call expanded. Not a single note anymore, a chord. On her data tablet, the The neural cascade readout showed two bonding signatures where there had been one, both at full amplitude. Both locked. Dr. Sorsh sat in the corridor of Crucible Station with her research tablet on one knee and a 400-kilogram predator's barbed forelimb resting against her ankle, and she cried for the first time in 9 years. Not because she was afraid, not because she was relieved, because the creature her entire career had been spent trying to understand had done the one thing she never thought she would see. It chose her too. The golden glow in Chisel's thorax spread until the entire corridor was warm with it, and the people walking past, maintenance workers, officers, researchers, the whole hard-edged machinery of the directorate, had to slow down and look, because the light was the kind you did not walk past without noticing. The kind that made you stop for half a second and think that something had gone exactly right. Maddox broke the last ration bar in half and handed her a piece. "Welcome to the pack, Doc." She took it, and for the first time since she had stepped onto Crucible Station 9 years ago, Dr. Sorsh felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be, sitting on a cold corridor floor, eating half a ration bar, next to a man who fixed things and a creature that had never been a monster at all. Just alone until now.